The Viet Cong gave very few American weapons a name. They identified most by type: the helicopter, the jet, the bomb. But one weapon got a proper name, spoken among cadres from the DMZ to the Mekong Delta. It was called Rong Lua, the Fire Dragon. First Lieutenant Gene S. Lucas of the 5th Battalion, 2nd Artillery recorded what happened after Viet Cong fighters encountered it. Giving up is a pretty common occurrence. Sergeant Ernest Smith of the same battalion said that if the Viet Cong have ever come against one before, they will usually stay away. These were not assessments written decades later. They were published in a period 9th Infantry Division document while the war was still being fought. The weapon they were describing had already been declared obsolete by the U.S. Army 3 years before it ever touched Vietnamese soil. The roads of Vietnam were killing Americans before they ever reached the fighting. Fuel tankers, ammunition trucks, refrigerator trucks, the entire logistics tail that kept combat units alive had to move constantly on roads that belonged to whoever was willing to die for them. Highway 1 along the coast, Highway 13, which the truck drivers called Thunder Road, running north from Saigon toward Loc Ninh, Highway 19 through the Mang Yang and An Khe passes, Route 9 from Dong Ha West to Khe San. The Viet Cong had spent years perfecting the ambush on all of them: triple canopy jungle cover, engagement ranges under 50 meters, battalion strength forces hitting both sides of a convoy simultaneously, time for monsoon cloud cover that grounded the helicopters, and the fast movers that might have saved the drivers. What the escorts had wasn't enough. Gun jeeps mounted a single M60 or a 50 caliber, not enough volume to suppress a battalion. M113 ACAVs brought 3 machine guns, but thin aluminum armor and a commander standing exposed above the hull. Even the M48 Patton, when one was available, was the wrong tool. A 90mm main gun cycles too slowly to spray a tree line, and the enemy knew it. The improvised gun trucks, the ones with the hand-painted names like Hardcore and Eve of Destruction, armor-plated 5-ton trucks with 450 caliber machine guns bolted to the bed, were brave and sometimes decisive, but they fought from inside the convoy itself. No platform could pull out of line, swing around, and pour sustained, suppressive fire directly into the ambush site. On August 25, 1968, the 88th NVA Regiment hit a Tay Ninh supply convoy on Route 22 at the Ben Chui rubber plantation. 7 drivers killed, 10 wounded, 2 captured, 23 relief troops killed, 35 wounded. Specialist William W. C. of the 62nd Transportation Company died that day earning a posthumous Medal of Honor. There was no Duster on that convoy. The Army already had an answer to all of this. It just thought it had thrown it away. The M42 twin 40mm self-propelled gun was built by Cadillac Motor Car Division, the same people who made the car your grandmother drove, at the Cleveland Tank Plant, production running from 1952 through June of 1956. 3,700 hulls in total. It was standardized on October 22, 1953, and upgraded in 1956 to the M42A1 with a fuel-injected 500 horsepower Continental engine. The chassis was the M41 Walker Bulldog light tank. It could do 45 miles per hour, had good ground clearance, and a powered 360-degree turret. Into that turret, they married 2 40mm M2A1 Bofors autocannons, a design lineage running back to World War II. The key engineering advance over its predecessor, the M19 gun motor carriage, was a larger turret ring. Combat ammunition stowage jumped from 352 rounds to 480. Not enough to fight all day. Enough to end an ambush. At combined cyclic rate, those 2 Bofors put 240 rounds per minute into a target. One gun fed while the other fired, the rounds arriving before the ambushers could reset. The 40mm high explosive tracer round had a point detonating fuse sensitive enough to detonate on contact, foliage, bark, or body, with a bursting radius of 50 meters per round. It did not wound people in jungle cover. It removed the jungle. Before the Duster, the heaviest sustained ground fire an escort could put into an ambush site was a 50 caliber machine gun. The Duster delivered 240 exploding rounds per minute. Not bigger bullets. Exploding ones. By 1963, the Army had declared 40mm guns obsolete against jet aircraft and transferred the M42 fleet to the National Guard. The Hawk missile was supposed to fill the gap. Hawk performed poorly at very low altitude. When U.S. ground forces flooded into Vietnam in 1965 and 1966, General William Westmoreland remembered what the older M19 had done in Korea and ordered 3 Duster battalions recalled. They arrived in Vietnam in November of 1966. The North Vietnamese Air Force never came south. Within weeks, the mission had permanently changed. Specialist 4th Class Joseph M. Bellardo was drafted at 19 from New Jersey and arrived in country with C Battery, 1st Battalion, 44th Artillery, in August of 1967. He would spend the next year riding one of those turrets through I Corps. On the morning of January 24th, 1968, his Duster would fire until the barrels nearly destroyed themselves and him. That story is coming. 1 week before the Tet Offensive, a composite task force rolled west out of Dong Ha on Route 9. 11 M42A1 Dusters, 5 Quad 50s, 152 troops of C Battery, 1st Battalion, 44th Artillery. Their mission was to relieve a Marine convoy that had been hit and stalled. The North Vietnamese Army was waiting. Rocket-propelled grenades came out of the tree line in the opening seconds. 1 Duster was destroyed. 1 M48 Patton was destroyed. The survivors closed the engagement. What followed was not a firefight. It was an annihilation delivered in volume. Over the course of the engagement, the task force expended roughly 20,000 40mm shells and 28,000 50 caliber rounds. 17 Americans were killed and 55 wounded before it was over. Specialist 4th Class Bellardo remembered the North Vietnamese Army less than 5 meters off the road, moving in small groups from truck to truck, climbing aboard the stalled vehicles to finish off the wounded Marines still inside. His Duster could not engage. The enemy and the Marines were the same silhouette at that range, and the 40mm gun had an 88-foot minimum engagement distance built into its mechanical nature. He held fire and watched. When the range opened and the flanks cleared, the guns went to work. Then the barrels started to fail. Replacement barrels had been fitted at the depot, still packed in storage grease. 2 rounds cooked off inside the improperly prepared tubes, the detonations going off inside Bellardo's own turret. He was wounded. He stayed on the gun. 3 months earlier, and 40 kilometers southwest, 1st Lieutenant Bruce Geiger commanded the Duster section of A Battery, 1st Battalion, 44th Artillery, at Khe Sanh Combat Base through the 77-day siege. 2 Dusters anchored either end of the combat base airstrip. Geiger told Marine Colonel David Lowndes directly that his Dusters and quads could alone defeat a human wave assault on the northern perimeter. In March of 1968, with North Vietnamese Army pith helmets spotted probing the wire, 1 Duster fired approximately 100 rounds into a 100-meter frontage. Everything in that radius was gone. Time elapsed, 60 seconds. The geometry was simple. An assault depended on closing the wire before defenders could concentrate fire. At 240 rounds per minute, a single Duster could put more high-explosive ordnance into a 100-meter frontage in 60 seconds than a rifle platoon could deliver in an hour. The assault math broke before it started. On January 13, 1969, an estimated North Vietnamese Army battalion tried the Ben Quy rubber plantation again, this time against a Cu Chi to Dau Tieng supply convoy, escorted by 2 Dusters from B Battery, 5th Battalion, 2nd Artillery. Specialist 4th Class Howard Doyle was among the crew. The Dusters opened up in coordination with the armored cavalry assault vehicles of the 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry, and the North Vietnamese Army attack collapsed. At least 73 enemy dead were confirmed. Weeks later, a second attempt on Route 239 by the same force cost them another 122. Staff Sergeant William Kunkel of the Triple Deuce said afterward, "I guess Charlie doesn't learn too fast. Each time he tries this, we come out way on top." The Viet Cong called it Rong Lua, Fire Dragon. The name spread through period U.S. reporting from 1967 and 1968, attributed to the sustained tracer arc at night, not muzzle flash, not burst fire, but a continuous arcing stream of light into the canopy that looked like nothing else in the war. Sergeant Ernest Smith of the 5th Battalion, 2nd Artillery, put it plainly. "Charlie doesn't usually mess with us unless he hasn't seen a Duster before. If the VC have ever come against one before, they'll usually stay away." First Lieutenant Gene S. Lucas of the same battalion said, "The VC call them fire dragons because they don't know what to make of them. Giving up is a pretty common occurrence." These were not post-war recollections. They were published in a period 9th Infantry Division document while the war was still on. No single captured enemy order bearing the words, "Do not engage convoys with Duster escort" has been confirmed in the open historical record. What intelligence reports, combat outcomes, and the testimony of the men who were there confirm is the same thing in operational language. The outcomes spoke for themselves. Within a year, the NVA adapted. They stopped avoiding Dusters and began targeting them first. RPG teams prepositioned on elevated ground dropped rockets into the open turret. Sapper attacks launched under fog and mortar cover, aimed specifically at the crew bunkers. They had learned what the Duster couldn't do. The open turret was its original sin as a ground combat vehicle. There was no overhead protection. Mortar airbursts, RPG tree bursts, satchel charges, everything went directly into the crew bay. The National Dusters, Quads, and Searchlights Association's own record is unsparing. Duster crews suffered more casualties than their share because they stayed on the guns when everyone around them was in a bunker. That was the job. 3 other limits the enemy eventually mapped. Inside 27 meters, the Duster couldn't safely engage, the minimum range that forced Bellardo to hold fire while NVA soldiers climbed onto the trucks. In close canopy, the 40mm fuse was too sensitive, detonating on twigs before reaching the target. That is why Dusters always operated paired with Quad 50s, whose penetrating 50 caliber rounds cleared the cover that prematurely burst the shells. At cyclic rate, 480 rounds burned through in roughly 85 seconds, after which the Duster had to pull out of line and find an ammunition truck. That became a convoy security problem embedded in the weapon's own arithmetic. 212 air defense artillery soldiers were killed across the 3 Duster battalions and attached units. The 1st Battalion, 44th Artillery, earned more than 1,000 Purple Hearts and a Presidential Unit citation. Against everything the Duster put into those tree lines, there was always a man sitting inside the turret with no roof over him. The M42 was declared obsolete twice, once by missiles in 1963, once by the end of the war in 1971. The pattern it proved, a repurposed anti-aircraft platform, written off by the procurement system and recalled to win a ground war the designers never imagined, has not aged. Germany's Flakpanzer Gepard twin 35mm cannons on a fast hull was retired as Cold War surplus and then shipped to Ukraine, where it has become one of the most effective weapons against Shahed, 136 drones over the Black Sea coast. Twin autocannons on a tracked hull. The same logic. Different enemy aircraft barely. The 4th Battalion, 60th Artillery was deactivated after Vietnam and reactivated on the 4th of March 2022 at Fort Sill as the Army's 1st Conus M. Shorad Battalion. 14 Vietnam veterans were present at the UN casing. Retired Sergeant Major Paul Hansen, a 4th 60th Duster veteran, said, "I'm phenomenally proud. It's wonderful to see them reorganize a unit that we never thought we'd see again." Wrong Lua. The enemy named it that. The men inside the turret had other names for it, some printable, most not. What the name means in the end is simple. You saw it once and you understood what it was. The Army threw it away, the enemy named it something else. And 70 years on, someone still has to sit in the turret with no roof, and the logic still holds.